Hello, everyone. Time for another Theology Thursday episode here with Jason Tripp, TripAdvisor, along with friend and author Matt Distefano, all the way from Southern California. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Hey, good. I'm in Northern California, but I'm
sorry.
good. Yeah.
Northern Cal.
I'll
if that's my only mistake of the day, we're doing well, right? So,
yeah. Just get it right out of the bat. Get it out of the way.
Get it out of the way right away. So, where exactly in California are you?
I live in a town called Chico, California. It's
for those of us in Canada, big cities. Where's that in relation to?
Big cities. So 2.5 hours north of San Francisco.
Okay.
3 hours north of San Francisco, something like that.
Nice. I've been to San Fran once, loved it. Didn't get as far north as Chico though. So
yeah, there's not much reason to.
All right. So you got a new book out. You just seem to pump out books every 6 to 9 months, It feels like.
And, something like that.
Title of the book is Learning to Float.
Yeah, is this gonna be backwards? I got it right here.
Yeah, there it is. Good. All right. So you've co-authored the book with Michelle Collins, who sadly can't be with us tonight. She had planned to be here, but got tied up with some travel. So we will shower accolades upon her in her absence. But she's a longtime friend of yours. Yeah. And you wrote this book, and it really is telling your story about deconstruction. But it's told in the context of a conversation between you and Michelle, who's trained as far as when the book was released, she was trained to be a licensed therapist. Is she's still on that journey, I guess? And
I don't know the direction she's going. She's not a licensed therapist. She is getting her doctorate in psychology.
Right.
And I don't know exactly. She does about 7 million things per day. So I don't know where in the process she
Hard
is.
to keep up with her, yeah.
Yeah. She's, competing in, bodybuilding, and she's getting her psychology doctorate, and she's writing books with yahoos like me. And then she does her regular 9 to 5, and, the list goes on.
I don't know how she does it. She's a superwoman. So we miss you, Michelle. Thank you for collaborating on this book. This isn't your first collaboration with her. You have a deep friendship that goes way back. So maybe why don't we just start before we get into any of the book content? Just maybe tell us a little bit about your friendship with Michelle, and why, what was the genesis of this book? Why did you reach out to her? And maybe talk about the title too. The title, Learning to Float. Where did that come from?
Yeah. So Michelle and I met online on Facebook. So for all the shit everyone talks about social media, like, it obviously has a good, it offers a good thing too. So people like Michelle have come into my life because of social media. I don't know what compelled her to drive up to my book release party for my first book back in 2015, but she drove from Thousand Oaks, California, to Chico, which is about an 8-hour drive. And her and I are both introverts, so somehow she was compelled to do that, and I was like, hell yeah, come on up. And from there we've gone to conferences together. We've met up during Heretic Happy Hour shows in Southern California. I think she competed one time, or a friend competed in Sacramento, and so I drove down. It's like 2 hours from me. Drove down and hung out, and we've just been, personality wise, interest wise, we've become quite close friends over, I guess now, almost 7 years. Wow. Probably 7 years online, but like meeting in person, it's been almost 7 years.
Sure. And you talk in the book that when you first met and got to know each other in some of your early conversations, I mean, you're well into your deconstruction. She's starting to ask some questions, and you just flat out told her, like, it's going to reach the point where you're questioning the existence of God. You just laid it on her right out of the gate. At least that's what she recalls it in the book, I think.
That's how she remembers it. It's probably true. I mean, to be honest with you, like, I don't do very well at sugarcoating things. It's like, I just say it how I say it, and it can come across a little bit blunt and everything. I try to be better about that, just because I forget, certain people believe certain things, or they're in certain places, and I forget that. And so I just might poo-poo something, or I might say something totally offhanded, and it might wreck someone, and I just go about my day like an idiot. That's probably what happens.
You don't realize till later that you wrecked
her.
You wrecked Michelle in a good way. Obviously, you have a great friendship, and hey, you told it like it was. You were blunt with her, and I think she's grateful for it, although she probably felt like a deer in the headlights when you told her that right out of the gate. But here you are 7 years later writing this book, right? So
yeah, and Michelle could take it. I mean, like she's a Marine, right? So
yeah.
and that's her
Marine
personality. Like let's just say it how it is, and we'll move from there.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what this book is. It's telling it like it is, but it's your story, and take it or leave it. People can't dispute your story, and you're very blunt with this is your story. You're not telling anybody else's story. You're just telling your story. And I want to personally thank you because you've dedicated this book to me and countless others. You've dedicated to everyone who has experienced the pain of spiritual deconstruction. And I'm like you, I'm a longtime spiritual deconstructor. I'm a pastor of a church. So my deconstruction was happening for the last 15 years while pastoring a church which makes things kind of unique. So I did a good job of trimming the herd, so to speak. But I pastor a church where a lot of people in our faith community, we're kind of their last stop on the way out. And so they're asking questions about deconstructing. And so I'll be recommending and sharing this book widely with my faith community and others. So the title, Learning to Float, where did that title come from and what does it mean? Let's just talk about the title maybe before we get into the content.
Yeah. The title, I never just try to title something. I always just allow it to kind of present itself. And as we were writing it, I think we said one of us says the phrase either early on. I think it's early on. And these are transcribed conversations, 95%. I mean, we edited them for, readability. But we literally had conversations that we did on Zoom and recorded them. And then I transcribed them because I have nothing better to do with my time. And then edited them and said the phrase learning to float. And I was like, oh, that's catchy. But it's also like, I think super apt. Like sometimes when you deconstruct your faith, you don't get from point A to point B. You learn how to not drown in whatever's going on.
Right.
And I think it fits well with kind of like what Alan Watts would talk about, like the law of reversed effort. It's like sometimes the best thing to do is relax and be still. And that's how you make it. If you're trying to clear a muddy puddle, you don't wipe away the dirt. You take your hands out of the water and allow it to settle to the bottom. So it's an analogy for figuring out how to keep your head above the water in the midst of deeply existential questions and crises.
It's a good analogy. And, I was trying to guess what the analogy was before I opened the book and I started reading and that phrase popped up repeatedly. So I like the fact you don't start with the title. It just kind of came out organically in your conversations. And so you said these were Zoom conversations and then you just transcribed them into the book. I was wondering the process. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it reads as a conversation. Each chapter is not titled chapter 1, chapter 2. It's titled session 1, session 2. It's meant to feel almost like a therapy session, but it's like being a fly on the wall, reading the book, listening into this conversation where you're opening up and being real and raw, and Michelle's responding and asking follow-up questions. So I love the conversational aspect of it. I think it was a wise choice to do this together in that format. So kudos to you both for that. I just want to read the chapter or the session titles, just give the listeners a taste. And so it's there's 7 sessions and then a bonus session. So the first session is setting the table of deconstruction, followed by the early years, sex, purity, and clumsiness. Surprise, surprise, that's the teenage years. The falling of the house of cards, which is an analogy I use often around here, followed by the death of God, putting the pieces back together, and final thoughts and words of advice. And then the bonus session is out of the closet. So maybe we'll just start at the beginning. The early years, I was fascinated. And as you were talking about your childhood, I was resonating with some things that dovetailed with my story. That's the beauty of telling your story. There's always going to be aspects that dovetail and resonate and things that are unique to your story. So as much as you want to, maybe can you just share a little bit about your childhood, and as you look back, just the reality of how influential and the good, the bad, and the ugly that we all carry from our childhood, especially those of us who grew up in a religious environment or churches, as we both did. What did you really inherit from those years that you had to carry forward?
Well, besides like trauma from my dad leaving and my parents going through a divorce and my mom and my stepdad going through multiple separations and living with my grandparents, like in the midst of all of that, like I did have, like, my mom's great, my stepdad's great, my grandparents when they were alive were fantastic, and so like didn't allow us, you know, when my parents or my mom and my stepdad separated, they didn't allow us to like flounder. Like we moved right in with them, everything was good, it was a secure house, and so in the midst of a little bit of like, I wouldn't call it chaos, but like tumultuous upbringing in that way, like there is a lot of stability as well. So it was a bit of a balance. And then church was more like, I don't remember church per se. I remember doctrines because I think those are what traumatized me. And, you know, there's no diagnosing done in the book. I've never been diagnosed with anything, but there are certain elements of complex PTSD of those traumatic doctrines and the way my body responded to them. I have those memories very vividly. So it was nightmarish, you know, hellish nightmares, and you know, just having like constant negative thoughts about whether I was going to make it to heaven or not, whether I would be raptured if my parents were late, whether, you know, I would come across a pile of clothes or whatever, my mom and dad's clothes. You know, those, yeah, I mean, a lot of us have. So a lot of us have these experiences of, am I good enough? You know, the Bible says I'm saved, but does it really? Because it talks about a lot of like people who think they're saved who aren't really. And so you go back and forth as a kid, and those are the things that stay with you. I have a lot of positive memories that stay with me, but a lot of the negative ones are kind of centered on those theological things that I was given as a kid. And so kind of the book chronicles how I undid, like the first 3 or 4 chapters at least, or sessions, whatever, are kind of how I got untangled from all those things that were there, you know, from the jump. You know, I don't remember when I was taught these things. They just kind of always were, right?
Yeah, and that's, as I was reading those early chapters, I was going back to my childhood, and I've done some of this work in my deconstruction process with some of my spiritual directors and friends and therapists, is realizing that, you know, childhood trauma is real for all of us, and there are a lot of things that I didn't even know were under the surface until some professionals helped me sort of mine that and dig that out. Right, we were talking a little earlier off camera, like we've been doing some major, you know, deconstruction work in our house, doing some major renovations. This week I've been pulling up ceramic tile, and it's just a nightmare. So I'm pulling up these tiles, and underneath these tiles there's another layer, there's just the ugliest floor you've ever seen, this linoleum from like the 70s, probably
the 70s. Yeah.
And there's literally like thousands of inch staples we're pulling out. So my hands are just one big blister right now. And I think that's a good analogy for deconstruction, right? You think you're pulling back a layer, you think, oh, I got this, and oh, there's another layer, and there's another layer, and it goes right back to your childhood. And I was reminded of that as I'm ripping up my floor and listening to your book at the same time this week. So what, as you're deconstructing, like as you're on that stage in your journey, and you're remembering some of the pain and trauma of your childhood, what, for you personally, what were some of the most painful moments or difficult moments on the journey
of deconstructing?
Yeah. As you reflect.
Yeah. The most painful ones is family stuff, and relational stuff, like friends and family and people that you know, I played in a bunch of worship teams. I think the realization kind of when you step away, when you no longer have the shared belief system, and then your friends, your former friends, or your friends quickly become your former friends, and you look back on your friendship, and I wouldn't conclude that it was fake. I would just say it was contingent upon me believing the same exact thing.
Right.
Which kind of sucks, because I have a lot of great memories with a bunch of friends. I had a large group of us musicians. Like we went to shows together, punk rock shows, hardcore shows. Like we did the whole thing all up and down California, played in bands with people, toured, up and down to Seattle and Bellingham and all the way down, so, and then you look back and you're like, oh, all these relationships went away the minute I wasn't an evangelical Christian who believed in hell, that LGBT is abomination, and the inerrancy of the Bible, and like all those things we wouldn't have talked about them as like, well, we all understand this friendship is based on X, Y, and Z. But when it came down to it, you realize, wow, those friendships were based on having to believe this certain thing, and the minute I don't is the minute now. We use Michelle talks about it, Kafka's metamorphosis. You know, when the main character is like, they just pretend he didn't exist. You know, he just, the minute he transforms, it's like we move on, and that's exactly. It's a apt analogy, but it's also like kind of sobering and makes you sad, because those good memories that you have are now a little bit tainted, and you're a little bit jaded about them.
Yeah, and triggering when you go back to those relationships too, because it's the pain. Totally. Sometimes the pain of loss, the grief that you remember, sometimes it clouds the good times. Yeah, my wife and I talk about that often. Like, as we're continuing to be in ministry as pastor, like we, you know, you have people over for dinner, you walk with them, you baptize them, whatever, and then all of a sudden I preach something that they don't agree with, and they get their nose in a joint and they're gone. It's like, really? Yeah. Like, exactly. After we've walked together for all these years, just like that, like they're gone. And that's all too common a story for us both.
And it makes me so mad when like you have people who I don't remember the person's name, who say like, oh, they're just doing it because it's sexy, it's the cool thing. And it's like, no, please read my book. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to agree with my conclusions, but it's my story. And we're not doing it because like it's what the cool kids are doing. You know, so it's like, come on, get real. You don't know anyone who's gone through this, and if you do, you're not listening.
Yeah, something came up on my social media feed this week. I didn't read the article. I think it might have been like Relevant Magazine or something. They were like, most pastors know of people deconstructing, but not personally. I'm like, really? Yeah. Like, I don't know how you could be like a leader in a church and not deconstruct. And you talk about that, like if leaders would have been more honest or truth-telling about where the rapture came from only a couple hundred years ago and other things, like that just baffles me. How leaders, are they just suppressing, or is it fear, or are they trying to dupe us? I mean, what's your take on this?
It's probably a lot of the above, and it's also like I've known pastors who went along with the status quo, and I won't name names and I won't roll them under the bus.
Yeah.
But they'll admit, like, at the end of the day, it was a good paycheck. So you know, and I'm like, well, that's shitty, but I get it. You know what I mean? Like, if it comes down to, if you're going to put your neck out for someone, you know, who believes whatever, oh no, you got to stay with the company line, because
your livelihood depends on it, right?
$5,000-$6,000 paychecks, pretty decent, you know.
Oh well.
And to have that go,
I got to move to California. I ain't getting that.
Well, I mean, I know it depends on the past. It depends on probably the denomination and the church and everything. Like that, you know? Yeah.
So one of the through lines in the book, I mean, and it's in the subtitle of the book, is, you know, sort of dismantling certainty and the myth that faith is synonymous with certainty. Let's just tease that a little bit. Like, when and how, like in your deconstruction journey, did you have to come to the grips that, you know, the reality that we can't be certain about much of anything? I mean, for you, it started, you mentioned eternal conscious torment, view of hell, and then sort of snowballs from there. And I've come to the place where I can honestly say I'm not certain about anything. And I've said that to my congregation as a pastor. I can't be certain that God exists. I can't be certain of everything, but I have different levels of confidence and trust in what I believe. And so that's a switch from certainty. So how did that process work in your life?
Well, I've always been philosophical, right? And so when you realize, like, there's certain things about the universe you just can't have deductive certainty about, and that's okay. And you know, so I've heard people in my life who say things like, you know, they kind of they tell stories about how it's more beneficial for them to hold things loosely and to not grasp. And I've never had to be the person who knew 100% with certainty that this is the way it is. And so I didn't have to like Keith Giles talks about the need to deconstruct the need to be certain. Yep. And I that was not one of the things that I had in my worldview that I personally needed to have. Now, I believed certain things, but I was always pushing back on them in some way. Right. So I wasn't certain about the rapture. I severely didn't want it to happen. I was just told, like, this is the way it is. Right. Or hell. Like, I wasn't certain about hell, and I certainly didn't want it to be real, like eternal torment or whatever. But I didn't know any other way. So I was always kind of, but then when I didn't believe in hell, like, it's one of those weird things. Like, I'm pretty certain that eternal torment doesn't exist. Like, there's no evidence for that. So I don't want to flip it all the way and say I'm certain that it doesn't.
Right. Right.
I'm just pretty. I trust, but there's more. I think there's more power in trust than certainty.
Agreed.
And once you experience that, so you have to experience things to know. Like I didn't experience that until, I didn't know that until I experienced it, right? So I trust that if there's a God, I trust that God is good. And if that God is good, like I trust that no one's going to suffer for all eternity, because otherwise we couldn't call that God good.
Right.
And trust is a powerful thing. Like, you can't be certain that our spouses aren't out there having an affair, right? You can't be certain. It's like proving a negative, right?
Right.
But I have trust that that's not happening. And that trust is very powerful. So I don't need certainty.
Yeah. And our trust grows in the context of a relationship.
100%.
You've been married, what, close to 20 years now?
Yeah, 17 going on, about to be 18. Yeah, 18 next month.
Okay, so we're coming up on 17 in a couple months. So similar thing, right? Like my trust in my spouse grows as we've gone through the highs and lows of marriage, like yours, I'm sure, right? Yeah. So it's in the context of relationship, and certainty really is antithetical to faith. If I'm certain about something, I don't need faith. I don't need trust, right?
Right.
So you talk a little bit about churches and faith communities being kind of echo chambers, and that jumped out at me. Like we just this idea of groupthink, and that sort of just feeds into the beast of certainty. Can you comment a little bit on how can churches even be in faith communities, not only individuals but communities? How can they even be self-aware of this, right? Like, they're so caught up in their own echo chambers. What is the catalyst, they think, for, or what's the appeal of certainty that keeps people so entrenched in it?
Well, the stakes are so high for so many people. Like, we're talking about the eternality of your soul. Like, if you don't get it right, if you believe that if you're in a pool and you're hanging onto the side and you believe that if you let go, you're going to drown. Like, you're going to grip the side so like hard, you're never going to get let go until like your body physically can't. And that's kind of the same. It's kind of the same way with like doctrines. Like, these are terrifying doctrines. Like, if you're raptured and left behind, you know what the next 7 years are going to be like. they're going to be hell on earth. And then if you don't get martyred for Jesus, you're going to then go from whatever this apocalyptic hellhole is to real hell, to literal hell. Like, and you believe, okay, so here the ticket out is Jesus. And whatever XYZ, whatever we say about Jesus, like the evangelical mantra.
Sure.
You're going to hold on to that for dear life. How could you not? Like, you're terrified of the alternative.
Yeah, and this is where. Go ahead.
I know. I don't know how to break people free except for to just chisel away. That's why I've written like 9 books or whatever it is. Like, it's why I podcast. It's why I blog. It's why I support authors who are kind of doing the same thing, because trying to liberate people from a tormenting experience. And from talking to people for years and years now, what I continue to hear is that people had a really bad experience with all these doctrines and all these types of churches. And it's almost like you don't need to have an answer of how you fix these churches, because people are just going to leave them. And you just want to be there for people when they do.
Yes.
Or a church like yours, like, I don't have the answer to why your church is doing this. I don't have the answer to why it continues to cycle. I don't have the answer of why we continue as a church to support like someone like Donald Trump. Like, that seems antithetical to even the conservatism I was raised in. So I don't get it. But we're here for you when you decide that enough is enough and you can't take it anymore. There are other people there who have kind of lived the similar experience, kind of had the same feelings, kind of had the same process. Different experiences, of course, because we all lead unique lives, but I've gone through it. So now what? Now we can kind of talk about,
Yeah. And that's the beauty of a book like this. You're not out to convince anyone or convert anyone. You're just, the more we put our stories out there. And I'm sure you on social media, you put yourself out there and you get trashed, you get anointed with titles like The Antichrist was a recent one you shared, right?
That was my favorite one.
That's a good one.
And God bless Glenn Siepert. Shout out for making that meme where I am.
Yeah, we're going to put that right. We're going to put that right there. There it is. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, but I'm sure like you, like me, I don't put myself out there quite as far as you. I try and be a little tactful, but for every angry voice that's out there, there's people like private messaging me. I'm sure they're just thanking you for your voice, right?
Totally.
Because there's thousands, millions of people out there. They're thinking these questions, they're asking these questions, but they're full of fear because of the doctrines they've been given. They're hanging on to the edge of the pool, right? And so voices like this in your book, this conversational style, I think will really help sort of liberate people and give them permission to ask similar questions, right? And find community.
I really hope so. I have nothing to convert anyone to, so
Right.
It's like, when people ask me, "Are you still a Christian?" I don't go about my day thinking of that label. Christianity's my home. It's what I know.
Yeah.
I also love Mahayana Buddhism. I like Sufism. I like some things that Catholics do. I like some things that Protestants have done. I like some things that Anabaptists do, and I don't like some things that all these groups do.
Exactly.
And so I have nothing. There's no. And then this is a terrible marketing pitch, but we don't give you an answer at the end of the book. We say, I don't know, but this is my story, and hopefully it can resonate with you.
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Spoiler alert. I don't. It's not a 12-step. Here's how you get
and that's
it's nothing like that.
There's so many of those books. I think most of society is done with those books. I mean, we're waking up to the pat answers, the formulas. I know I've been down that road, and I don't want any of those. I want something real. I want something raw. I want something vulnerable. And in your book, Michelle, and you offer that, and so it's a real gift. So use the analogy in session 4 of this, the falling of the house of cards. Can you just talk about, for those that haven't used or heard of that analogy? I'm familiar with that. I use that often myself. But what is that analogy all about, the house of cards, and what does the falling of the house of cards look like, or what did it look like in your life?
Well, it's just kind of an analogy of making a house full of playing cards, and you pull one out and the whole thing goes down. And for me, it was it's like there's a few of them and they're pulled at the same time.
Right. So hell is one, rapture's another, right?
Right.
Each belief is a card. Yeah.
Sure. But specifically, there's one that sticks out, and it's the apologetic for the type of slavery allowed and taught in the Bible.
Yes. So there's a section in the book where you talk about that. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I couldn't shake how, on the one hand, like I was at this men's Bible study and I was deconstructing, and I had answers to what I would say to the Bible's view of slavery. But I wanted to see what these people in the group would. And so I was talking about, the passages that seem to promote slavery or how to own slaves. And I don't think the gentleman who answered looked up, and he just answered, well, they treated their slaves a lot nicer, so God was okay with it. And I thought, like,
just nonchalantly, just
nonchalantly, like, just God's cool with it as long as you're nice to your slave. Like, and I was just like, that can't be okay with you. Like, it doesn't register in my brain how that can be okay with you. Like, the God of the universe, these James Webb photographs just came out. Like, God is in charge. Like, it's massive. And like, he's like, well, and there's also a way to treat your slaves. I'm like, nope, this can't be it. This, pull out the house, like, that's done. Like, inerrancy's done, infallibility's done.
That ties into inerrancy, like, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way you can defend that without inerrancy. There's no way without that view of the Bible. I'd say, hey, you, Mister, who is using the Bible to justify slavery. If you didn't have that, your moral code within you would never justify that.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was just the violent strands of the Old Testament. Like, I mean, I experienced the love of Jesus growing up, even in a conservative evangelical household. Like, I knew there was a God, that God was love. I experienced that from a young age. And then, you grow up and you're like, wait a minute. Noah's Ark's not a children's story, right? As it was in grade 3 Sunday school class, Walls of Jericho, all these things where we're celebrating as children. Like, whoa! When you start reading those with teenage adult eyes, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, time out. And that sent me into a real tailspin. I know for a lot of people, my peers, it does as well. Like, how do you reconcile? Like, a good friend of mine says, like, did God just take a happy pill between the Old and New Testament? I know that's an oversimplification, but you can read the Bible and come away with like you've got multiple gods here, right? Because the Bible's multivocal. So for me, that was the big card that I pulled out of, and everything just started toppling from there.
The violence was a big one for me, and we're just in realizing like I got to the place where my theology had to be practical in the way I live. Like I can't just put out these platitudes of God's ways are higher than our ways, or that doesn't work for me. I went to university, I studied some philosophy. Like it just doesn't work. Like I can't, So yes, the whole answer is just taking philosophy courses. That's the answer.
That's the short answer to it.
But no, I was just okay. So in Genesis 19, they'd say, I think it's 19, right? It's been a long time since I read the Bible. Spoiler alert. Sodom and Gomorrah, and you've got to go like, okay, so if it's not about LGBTQ, but that's the answer, right? That they say it's God smote them because of that. And you're thinking to yourself, well, in both of these cities, there's not a pregnant lady. And we're in this discussion about, you see where I'm going with this, about abortion, right? And Roe v. Wade being taken, and it's like God is pro-life. Okay, so 2 stories, Sodom and Gomorrah, not one pregnant lady. Noah's flood, not a pregnant lady on earth, or a toddler, or a baby. Or any,
you can't reconcile that. Yeah.
You can't reconcile it. You have to say that yes, we can't prove. I mean, I think it's a mythology, but if it's literal, you can't prove that there was a pregnant lady, but we must assume someone was pregnant on earth when God flooded it and basically killed them. And how does that not kick off your deconstruction right there? If that's the view you take of the Bible, how does it not? I can't resonate. I can't force myself to go back and believe that. I can't. It's literally impossible.
Yeah. No. And so for you, it all comes to a head. Session 5, the death of God. And so you go through this season of agnosticism, atheism, as I think if we're honest, most of us have been there. And if I'm honest, there have been times where I've gotten up on a Sunday morning, I'm preaching a sermon like, I don't know if I believe any of this. I'm not trying to fake it or be inauthentic, but I'm in the midst of my deconstruction. I'm like, here's what I got to give, but I don't know where I'm at right now. So, and you talk about that in your life, but then you get back to, and you don't end the story there. I'm glad you don't, because you have a chapter about putting the pieces back together. So like rock bottom, if we want to use that expression, but it's liberating. You get to this place where you're free to say, I don't know if God exists. I don't know if I'm a Christian. Yeah. And then, what did that journey look like for you from that point to putting what do you don't want to build another house of cards, obviously. No. What is a faith system, if we want to use that word? Like, what does that look like for you from that point moving forward? I mean, obviously there's something ideologically that is driving you forward these days. So what are you putting your trust in? Yeah. As opposed to back in the days we're trying to deconstruct from.
Yeah, I put my trust more in my direct experiences, and I don't believe the BS that we can't trust ourselves, or we're going to deceive ourselves, or Satan's going to deceive. Like, I don't believe that anymore, and to some degree, like, I don't want to trust myself entirely. Like, I want to weigh my my beliefs and my feelings with maybe so it's a balance, right? But I start with direct experiences, and I try to be more curious. Like when I was an evangelical, like, you're not curious. You can't be curious. How could you be curious about Buddhism? How could you be curious about something that could potentially send you to hell, or something like that? Now I'm more interested in other people's experiences. I don't need to. I place my trust in kind of just allowing the present moment to be what it is. And so you see all these Christians now, it's like they're engaging in these culture wars. They have to have an opinion on transgender. They have to have an opinion on socialism. They have to have an opinion on all these things. And it's like, where's your curiosity? Mm-hmm. Like I don't need, spoiler alert, I'm a part of the LGBTQ community. I don't know much about transgender stuff. But I don't need to. Like, I can learn and I don't need to make a judgment call about it. even though I affirm it. But I don't need to say I know everything about it, so then I'm going to tell you why it's wrong.
Right.
Why do Christians have the need to do that? Like, so I've gone to this place where what really leads my ideology is like listening to others with empathy. When I listen to someone that I don't have much experience with, it allows, and with empathy and compassion, it allows me to be a better human. So that's what drives it. And if my theology can't match up with that, then it's not them that's the problem. It's my theology that's the problem.
Right. Right. And I think in my experience, what undergirds that us versus them mentality, it's a whole lot of fear, right? Again, it's back to the holding on to the side of the swimming pool there. If faith is certainty and my house of cards is starting to wobble, then my posture is either going to be this or it's going to be this, right? And certainty creates a phobia of learning and it works against curiosity. But it's so freeing, it's so liberating when you can get to the place, realize I don't have all the answers. I can learn from your story. You can learn from my story. I can learn from my Buddhist neighbor, my transgender neighbor, whomever, right? When we start seeing people as just humans that we're sharing this planet with, I think that we're getting closer to the heart of God. And unfortunately, the church often is working against that.
It's a scary thing for people because they're back to this certain. Their whole worldview is built on this certainty, and then they take that outside of like the certainty about where your soul is going. That's the number one. But then that kind of lays the foundation for trying to be certain about everything, and it's like sometimes Matt doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah, sometimes I don't, and I'll say it. But that's so liberating. Matt, what do you think about this? I don't know. I don't need to know.
Yeah, I've been learning to say that a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do we in the church need to have an opinion on everything? It's like we don't. Like sometimes you have to place your trust somewhere, and it should be for good reason. But it's okay to say like I don't know. I really don't. I don't know what I would do about that. So
and that I find that can be threatening to some, but that's so liberating to others. I find more and more people in more and more circles are being okay with that. They're valuing vulnerability and authenticity more than pat answers and formulas and fake it till you make it mentality that you talk about in the book as well. I mean, if those who are listening, maybe there's some are listening that they're just, they're recognizing they have a house of cards theology and ideology and framework, but they're maybe paralyzed or gripped by this fear that, the whole thing topples. It's going to be catastrophic, not only for them, but relationally, right? We talked about the pain and the trauma is losing relationships. And a lot of people, they fear going into deconstruction because they think it's too much to sacrifice. I don't want to sacrifice my relationship with my spouse or my in-laws. I mean, in your case, that was, friction in your world. And, what's community look like for you? A lot of people think it's not worth it because I'm going to lose community. If I deconstruct or I lose my faith community, but you've found community, right? Michelle and others are like, for those that are worrying about losing community, how has community been a lifeline for you moving forward? What's that look like?
Well, it becomes, this is easier said on the other side.
Yeah,
but it becomes more authentic. Like I know with my best friend Mike, I know with Michelle, I know with Keith, I know with Raphael, other people from the Heretic Happy Hour. I know that when my beliefs change drastically, unless they go back to being harmful or something, that my relationships are maintained.
Right.
And so that to me is like, okay, my relationships, to use a biblical analogy, are built on a rock rather than sand. My relationships before were built on sand. Like, we might happen to like Me Without You or some other band or whatever, but that can change. But we've built our relationship on Calvinism or penal substitution atonement theory.
Right.
And the minute you don't think that, you're discrediting the Bible and you're taking away the work of Christ and now we can't be friends. Now it's like, if I'm not a Christian, Keith and Michelle and Mike and Ralph are all my friends. If I go back to being a Christian, Keith and Michelle and Mike and Ralph are all my friends. So you're realizing like, this is way more authentic. This is an actual relationship built on the relationality of it rather than in a set of agreed upon doctrines or ideologies.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. That's so true.
But it becomes a ragtag group of misfits. Don't get me wrong; it doesn't look pretty. Like, we all bring our messiness and our warts and stuff, but that's the realness of being human, and that's the good stuff.
Right. It's a beautiful mess, right? You realize who your real deep friends are, like, because when you're going through a mess, they're there for you. Whereas, the superficial friendships, as soon as you push back or disagree with something they believe in, like, they're gone, or you're gone, one or the other, right? And it's painful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you end the book with some final thoughts and words of advice. And so, for those who are listening, those who are considering reading this book, and I recommend pick up a copy of this book. If you're going through a deconstruction, and even if you're not, and you know someone, maybe someone in your family, or maybe just trying to understand what someone going through a deconstruction looks like, hearing your story, I think, in the context of the conversation with Michelle, will help people grow in their empathy. So if you're not, and you want to help understand the process, just hearing Matt's story, then pick up the book. Certainly if you're in it, or you're starting to have some questions, your house of cards is just starting, it hasn't toppled yet, but it's shaken, and you got this fear, and I think pick up the book, read it in a group, read it with some trusted friends. I think there'll be value in that. But for those listening, Matt, maybe just some final thoughts, just some words of advice to those that might be just where you or I were 15, 20 years ago. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I just, life is short, and be authentic to yourself. And you know in your gut if something's not right. If something's like, I didn't have a hermeneutical framework for why slavery is wrong in the Bible or at all. I didn't need I have a hermeneutical framework now. I didn't have it then, but something in my gut was like, that can't, whatever that is, I'm pointing, if you're watching, if you're listening, you can't hear, but I'm pointing and saying that is wrong. I don't know what that is, but it's wrong. You know it in your gut, and you know it in your soul. And you only have, I'm turning 40 this year. You only have so many years in this incarnation, right? You only have so many years in this meat suit before it wears out and stops working. And don't waste it not being true to yourself. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pretty. You're going to be unmotivated many days. But having the discipline to work through it is, it's on the other end. It gets easier. It gets better. You run into people who are going through the same thing, and you're not alone in doing it, even though it does seem like it. But it is worth it, because you have to be honest. You have to be true to yourself, and yeah.
It's good. So how can people track along with you? How can they keep in touch if they want to connect with your voice, social media? I'll put links in the show notes to some of the other books you've written where people can pick those up as well. But as far as tracking along with you, you're active on the podcast scene, social media. How can people connect with you?
Yeah. If all my handles on social media, if you find me on Facebook, if you find me on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at MJ_Distefano. My website's allsetfree.com, and there's links to everywhere there. So you can get to all the podcasts, you can get to all the books, you can get to the socials on there.
Okay. And what's next? What's cooking? I know you're up to something. What's the next thing on your agenda? Dude. You got another book cooking?
Well, there's one thing I can't. Well, yeah. Well, of course, I got like 6. There's one thing I can't talk about yet. So
no, it's all good. I understand.
But yeah, I am writing a book called The Wisdom of Hobbits. I'm also a big Tolkien nerd. Yes. So if you want to talk for the next 3 hours about Tolkien, we can. But at some point, you probably want to get to bed. So I'm writing a book called The Wisdom of Hobbits, and it's the title's pretty obvious. It's like, what is the wisdom we can glean from living life as a hobbit, especially in light of climate change and ecological disasters and being so divisive? And then, so what are some of the things that we can learn not to do from hobbits? So it's kind of a deep dive into Tolkien and Hobbit living. And I'm taking it more seriously than any of my theological books, because I respect Tolkien that much.
Yeah, he's been a really helpful voice on my journey as well. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic or excited are you on the new series that's coming out September, I believe, Amazon Prime? I mean, are you cautiously optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you holding your breath?
Yes, okay. I was pessimistic at first once I saw like the logo and then the Amazon was doing it.
Yeah.
And I saw the little hype trailer and I was like, nah, man. And then I became more. So a bunch of people got flown out to view the set. Two of them I know online, talking to Alan Sisto and Sean Marchese from the Prancing Pony podcast.
Yep.
And they were like, hey, we're pleasantly surprised about what we've seen so far. Not going to make any judgments yet until we see it.
That's good.
And so I've heard, but then I've heard like Tom Shippey, who's a prominent Tolkien scholar, kind of walked away from being involved in the project or anything. Like, so I'm cautiously optimistic. I won't make judgments until I see it. I'm not 100% a purist. Like, you can introduce non-canonical things, but you have to be really, really careful because you don't want to fuck it up. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's no Peter Jackson, but we'll see, right? Like, so yeah, I'm fingers crossed.
I think even those movies have their own problems, but I think Jackson did a really good job. Yeah. So this one comes out September at some point.
I think it's early September it comes out. So fingers crossed. We'll see. Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome.
All right. Once again, everybody, the book is Learning to Float: Deconstructing Doctrinal Certainty to Embrace the Mystery of Faith. There it is. Thanks to Matt.
I just got it yesterday. I ordered, so I've got some copies. I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah, I just ordered my physical copy. It's on the way. But thanks for sending me an advanced copy and reaching out. And a shout out to Michelle. Thanks to her again for the collaboration. We missed her tonight, but maybe we'll take up down the road again, and maybe we'll talk about all things hobbits next time.
And maybe we can like show off our muscles together and like.
Not much for me to show here. I can show off my draft ball maybe. Yeah.
There you go.
Thanks, man. Appreciate the time. Have a good one. Take care.
Thanks.
Yeah.